We're naturally drawn to big things. A bigger house, a bigger car, a bigger screen. Bigger always feels better. But what if that idea breaks down when we apply it to the planet itself? What if Earth wasn't just slightly larger, but suddenly grew to the size of Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system? At first glance, it sounds like a dream. More space, more resources, more room for everyone. But that's only if you assume size comes without consequences. In reality, a planet that massive wouldn't just be a bigger version of Earth. It would be an entirely different world, ruled by new laws. Because when a planet changes this much, life doesn't adapt slowly. It collapses. So what would actually happen if Earth became as big as Jupiter? Gravity changes everything. The very first thing to break wouldn't be cities or oceans. It would be your body. Jupiter's mass is enormous compared to Earth's. If Earth suddenly matched it, gravity at the surface wouldn't double or triple. It would become roughly 11 times stronger than what we experience now. That means your weight would instantly multiply by 11. Someone who weighs 90 kilograms today would suddenly weigh close to a metric ton. Human bones and muscles aren't built for that. Standing would be impossible. Movement would stop. Most living creatures would be crushed under their own weight within moments. And it wouldn't just affect people. Buildings would collapse, bridges would buckle, even solid rock would struggle to support itself. Everyday objects, chairs, beds, vehicles, would fail under their own mass. The world wouldn't fall apart slowly, it would flatten. Even the atmosphere wouldn't escape the change. With stronger gravity, the atmosphere itself would become heavier, pressing down on everything like a physical force. But here's where things get even more disturbing, because this disaster depends on how Earth became that big. Two very different worlds. There are only two ways to imagine a planet like this. The first is that Earth was always this massive. If that were the case, life wouldn't look anything like what we know. From the very beginning, organisms would evolve to survive brutal gravity. Trees would grow short and wide instead of tall. Roots would dig deep and spread wide just to stay upright. Mountains would never rise very high because rock can only support so much weight before collapsing. In that world, everything would be compact, dense, and built to resist constant pressure. But that's not the scenario that truly matters. The second scenario, the terrifying one, is that Earth suddenly changes overnight. One day the planet is normal, the next morning it has Jupiter's mass. In that case, there's no time to adapt. Skyscrapers, bridges, power grids, everything humanity built would fail instantly. Entire cities would collapse under forces they were never designed to handle. Civilization wouldn't struggle, it would vanish. And if anything somehow survived that initial collapse, the atmosphere would be waiting. Even if something somehow survived the crushing gravity, the planet still wouldn't be done, because the next threat wouldn't come from the ground, it would come from the air. With gravity suddenly 11 times stronger, Earth wouldn't just pull harder on solid objects, it would drag the atmosphere down too. Every molecule of air would be squeezed closer to the surface, piling up into a dense, suffocating layer. The sky wouldn't feel like air anymore, it would feel like weight. Breathing wouldn't just be difficult, it would be impossible. Lungs aren't designed to fight that kind of pressure. Each breath would feel like inhaling through a wall. Humans, animals, anything that relies on oxygen would disappear almost instantly, not in a dramatic explosion, but in total silence. And the pressure wouldn't stop there. It would start rewriting the rules of physics themselves. Water, for example, wouldn't behave the way we expect. On today's Earth, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius because of our atmospheric pressure. But on this giant Earth, pressure would trap water molecules so tightly that boiling at 100 degrees wouldn't happen anymore. Water would need far higher temperatures just to turn into vapor. The entire planet would function like one massive pressure cooker. But as extreme as the surface becomes, the real danger would be hidden much deeper. The magnetic shield collapses. Deep inside Earth, molten iron and nickel are constantly moving. That movement creates the planet's magnetic field, an invisible shield that deflects deadly radiation from the sun. It's one of the main reasons life ever survived here at all. But on a planet this massive, the pressure squeezing Earth's interior would be enormous, and pressure changes how materials behave. Just like water refusing to boil, molten metals could lose their ability to move freely. If that motion slows down or stops, the magnetic field weakens, or worse, it collapses completely. Without that shield, Earth becomes exposed. Solar radiation and cosmic particles would slam directly into the surface. Any creature still alive inside sealed shelters would be living on borrowed time. Even brief exposure to the outside world would damage DNA almost instantly, triggering aggressive cancers and genetic breakdown. At that point, long-term survival wouldn't just be unlikely, it would be impossible. And if you're wondering whether plants could carry on alone, that hope doesn't last long either. Ecosystems fall apart. Some short, sturdy plants might survive the initial collapse, but their struggle would only be beginning. The thickened atmosphere would block sunlight, starving plants of the energy they need for photosynthesis. The extreme gravity would turn pulling water from roots to leaves into a constant battle. Even basic growth would become exhausting, and ecosystems don't survive on plants alone. No animals means no pollination. No insects means no decomposition. Nutrients stop cycling. Soil becomes lifeless. Even the toughest plants would eventually run out of options. Agriculture wouldn't just fail, it wouldn't even be possible. No one could lift tools, no one could transport water. Even the strongest human alive wouldn't be able to raise an axe under 11 times Earth's gravity. At best, a few plants might cling to existence in isolation, but they'd be trapped in a dead world. No forests, no food chains, just silent survivors waiting for an inevitable end. And Earth wouldn't be the only thing paying the price.
The moon is torn apart. The moment Earth became this massive, the moon's fate would be sealed. Right now, the moon orbits us because of a delicate balance between Earth's gravity and the sun's pull. But multiply Earth's gravity by 11 and that balance disappears. Earth would begin dragging the moon closer, stretching it, stressing it from the inside. At first, nothing would seem wrong. Then, cracks would form. Then fractures, until the moon finally breaks apart into billions of pieces. Much of that debris would rain down on Earth, bombarding the surface with impacts the size of cities. Firestorms would sweep across the planet. The surface would turn into a non-stop inferno of explosions and molten rock. The rest of the debris might settle into orbit, forming rings around Earth. Beautiful from a distance, but created through total destruction. The moon that once lit our nights would be gone, replaced by a spinning graveyard of stone. And with that, Earth's nightmare would only be getting started. Earth becomes a magnet for destruction. Once Earth reached this size, the danger wouldn't stay on the surface, it would spread into space itself. With gravity 11 times stronger, Earth's influence would stretch far beyond its current reach. Objects that would normally pass by harmlessly would suddenly find their paths bending inward. Asteroids, meteors, space debris that had been stable for millions of years would now be pulled toward the planet. Earth wouldn't just attract them, it would hunt them. Impacts would stop being rare events, they'd become constant, near-daily collisions, each releasing energy comparable to massive weapons. Entire regions would be erased in seconds. Fireballs would light up the sky over and over again, leaving no time for recovery between disasters. And this wouldn't be a short phase.
It would last for thousands of years. Even after the moon was gone, even after the atmosphere stabilized into its deadly new form, the sky would remain hostile. Survival wouldn't depend on skill or intelligence anymore. It would depend on luck. But even if a few people somehow beat those odds, the future still wouldn't exist. Why civilization could never return? Let's imagine the impossible. A small group of humans survives inside advanced underground shelters, protected from gravity, pressure, radiation, and falling debris. The question isn't how they survived, it's what happens next. On a planet the size of Jupiter, distance alone destroys civilization. Travel that takes hours today would take weeks, maybe months. Fuel, vehicles, and communication systems wouldn't survive that scale. Even sending a signal across the planet would take significantly longer. Trade collapses, coordination disappears. Every surviving group becomes isolated, permanently cut off from the rest of the world. Without connection, there's no global knowledge, no shared technology, no recovery. Each pocket of survivors slowly regresses, not because they fail, but because the planet makes cooperation impossible. In the end, this thought experiment reveals something uncomfortable. Earth doesn't support life because it's big, powerful, or special. It supports life because it's balanced. Gravity strong enough to hold an atmosphere, but weak enough to let us move. Pressure high enough to keep water liquid, but low enough to breathe. A magnetic field strong enough to protect us, and a size small enough to stay connected. Change any of that too much, and the entire system collapses. A bigger Earth wouldn't be a better world, it would be an empty one.